Did you know that demons can't make you feel a certain way? They don't have power over your emotions. They come from without. They are in the atmosphere, upper and lower dimensional beings. They are outside of our bodies. How can they influence us? They don't have power over our vessels. They don't have power over our emotions or our thoughts. What they are is thoughts. They come to us as thoughts, as emotions, but they can't control ours. We've been washed by the blood of Yahushua, immersed bride of Yahushua. They don't have any power in us. They're not inside us. Definitely not inside us, are they? Because once the strong man is in there, you can't have two different spirits in the same vessel. No way. Once Yahushua moves in, there's no unclean spirits inside us at all. So why are we so bloody miserable? Why are you so miserable? It can't be spirits, because they're out here. They come in through thoughts, which we let in. We choose to let in because we're not arresting our thoughts. But even once we let them in, we choose to believe the thoughts. We choose to behave them, to speak them, to think them more and dwell on it. And we choose that. But even then, we're living a lie. We've received a lie. That's still not the spirit. The spirit's still outside our body. So why are we so miserable? Because our misery is from within. So if there's no spirits within us, what's the pain? What's the misery? Because we've always loved it. Oh, the devil made me do it. The devil made me do it. Ooh, the devil. Can't be the devil. Can't be Satan or his unclean spirits. Yeah, they tempt us and taunt us and pester us all day, but they're all outside. You're feeling as miserable as you are because of what's inside you. What you've done, what you've said and what you've thought. But where's it come from? Where's the feeling and emotion come from? Yahushua. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because the bride of Yahushua, the global body of believers, will not talk about being flogged, disciplined, chastised, rebuked, as though it's not written in Hebrews 12. Don't want to talk about it. You know how many years I've been trying to have conversations with people about don't want to talk about it. Don't want to talk about it. Pussyfoot around the subject, So what does that tell me about them if they don't want to talk about it? They're getting it big time. Nobody wants to face that the misery they're feeling is because they're getting flogged. And a flogging can be a gut-wrenching, ripping your back half open, agonizing pain, or it can be a slap on the wrist, depending on what your behavior is. How far up the track or along the race you are to behaving yourself. If you're fed up with the pain, then shut your mouth and stop doing the dirty habits you do and thinking the way you think. Yahushua is not pleased with his bride, and you can tell because when you look at the expression on their faces, miserable, filthy, depressed, wet blankets sitting and talking to most of these people. But you can't tell them that, of course. Oh no, it's demons. We're being attacked. Well, yeah, you are being attacked. That's not where your emotional feeling comes from, because they're out there. Your feeling comes from the set-apart portal within you, whether you are connecting to it or not, because how did Israel feel when the portal was open in their camp? Particularly when David came along and, the tabernacle was open, the doorway was open, and the light just went out. Presence went out into the whole camp, the nation. It's like a thickness, like a drunkenness, an intoxication of his esteem, of his presence. Are you feeling like that? No, I can't feel like that because he said this and she said that and I did this and this and this and this. Excuses. Excuses are like assholes, mate. Everybody's got one and no one's interested in hearing them. All right? So you got to move on from that, okay? Let's talk about flogging today. Flogging. Look, this is Yahushua. Flogging, training, disciplining his bride. Like a father flogs a son. Do you face that this is your Messiah? Or is your Messiah all about love? Well, what have we been reading in the 5 books of Moses? He doesn't change. He wipes out nations. They're about to go into the promised land and wipe out 6 nations, not even give them a chance. No, not interested. Hate them. Hate their behaviour, hate them, don't let them come in. No chance. Get rid of them straight away. So, does he change? So remember this whole flogging thing. And I don't know where it's going to connect and where it's not going to connect today. I've been pretty busy the last 2 days. And so before we go into the actual flogging topic, let's get into the scriptures a little bit and let's see if it's going to connect. I'm not sure today if it's going to connect. Moses is up to, where are we? Deuteronomy 23. And he starts off by saying, well, before we say that, sometimes this verse is at the end of the last chapter and sometimes at the beginning of this chapter. So we put it at the beginning of this chapter today. A man must not take his father's woman, nor uncover his father's skirt either. Remember in our last episode we were talking about all the illicit sexual mixtures and behaviours that are not allowed to be performed in Yahushua's camp. So we're continuing on with that. This is a bit racy, this topic as well. A man must not take his father's woman, nor uncover his father's skirt either. Interesting. I thought they weren't allowed to be a transvestite. What's a man wearing a skirt for? Not like that. This is the literal translation here. A son is forbidden to have sex with his former stepmother. Because there were other laws and consequences for sleeping with your mum, sleeping with dad, sleeping with all that. They came under other divine laws. This here is specifically speaking about a son is forbidden to have sex with his former stepmother, who is not currently married to his father, or his father's concubines, who are currently in the father's household, or even concubines that belong to the deceased father. So you can see that these belong to the father. You're not allowed to, come in and... While it may not seem that this law has much to do with inheritance, because several of the world's known cultures of this era traditionally passed along the wives and concubines of the deceased father, as though they were some kind of possession to the inherited son. In a situation like this, a man's stepmother literally did become his wife, because he inherited all his father's possessions and all his father's harems, all the concubines, everybody. So in a situation like this, a man's stepmother literally did become his wife, and his father's concubines now formed his harem, and all the usual sexual rights that went with these relationships were included. Yahushua says that while the outside nations customarily do this, in Yisrael, that is not to be the case. He wants them set apart, remember? There is another similar custom of that era that is also being addressed here, and it shows up back in Genesis in the story of Reuben taking one of his father Jacob's concubines. And the custom is that if a man intends on usurping the throne, whether it is of a kingship or a tribal leader, or of his own clan or anything of that nature, if he intends to usurp the throne, he shows his power and authority by having sexual relations with the current or former leader's wives and concubines. That's how you humble a king, a leader, even your own father. That's how you humble him and move in your authority, by sleeping with the most precious thing to him. So we're not going to read that in Genesis. You can click on that link there if you want to go to Genesis 35 to 36. It talks about Reuben sleeping with Bilhah. We'll just talk about it. Reuben's firstborn heist. Remember, Jacob's favourite wife, Rachel, had just died, and Reuben was Jacob's firstborn son. Reuben was Jacob's firstborn son, the firstborn. And even though it was from Leah, he was still the firstborn. Bilhah was one of Jacob's concubines who had produced a number of sons for Jacob, and she also served as a servant to the now deceased Rachel. Reuben went and had sex with Bilhah, and Jacob found out about it. Was this incident a minor family issue or a major problem? There was a serious consequence for Reuben having sex with Bilhah, and when Jacob was on his deathbed and it was time for him to pronounce the blessing upon his sons, which essentially means to read the will, Reuben acknowledged as Jacob's firstborn, did not receive the firstborn birthright or double portion, blessing. I changed that. What's going on? There we go. Update your page. So even though Reuben was acknowledged as the firstborn, he did not receive the firstborn birthright or double portion blessing, which was rightfully given to the firstborn, because he had sex with his father's concubine, Bilhah. So interesting, it wasn't just, it's written right here. By having sex with Bilhah, Reuben was symbolically demonstrating that he was taking over all that belonged to Jacob. He was usurping Jacob's leadership, taking his inheritance now, before you're even dead, moving in on you women. This was not some vague, lusty or impulsive act with a subtle psychological meaning. That's what we've always heard. Oh, he was a bit pervy, a bit like Kenan, Noah's grandson, a bit pervy. No, it wasn't anything to do with that. I mean, these guys are 40s, 50s, 60 years old by now. They're not some just adolescent teenager, you know. Well, these are old, probably in today's society, what we would call old men, you know. So it wasn't just a pervy, fly by the seat of your pants, lustful thing. Not at all. Lusty or impulsive act with this. This is how things were done in the Middle East. Everyone understood that there was really no difference between this act and Reuben literally marching an army against his father, or even attempting to assassinate him. See how when you go into the culture and immerse yourself in the culture, you just go, wow, you know. That's why there was such a serious consequence. And Jacob didn't do anything right away. It appears that in this case, Jacob decided not to immediately and openly confront Reuben. Rather, he chose to let things play out, and at the right moment, punish Reuben in the most humiliating and far-reaching manner. Reuben would be denied the birthright he naturally figured for himself, to become the leader of the rapidly growing nation of Yisrael. And of course, when we read incorporated the apocryphal books, I think there was a book of Reuben that we read in there as well. It said that he got an STD. He had all these welts, all these sores all over his groin, remember? And Jacob had to pray for him. And he wasn't the same. His brother said he wasn't the same ever again. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But you can't do this kind of behaviour and not have a consequence. So whether that was the consequence or whether it was just merely what happened on Jacob's deathbed, who knows? But we definitely know this one was true. He missed out. The firstborn blessing and birthright went to Joseph, his two kids anyway. And the rulership was given to Judah, remember? So, the two houses. So this instruction here about taking a father's woman or uncovering his skirt simply takes an unwritten law, something that was just understood, that Yahushua had impressed upon humanity in the most ancient of times, as demonstrated in the Reuben affair, and made it official. So this wasn't a big shock, you know. They knew they weren't allowed to do it, but he's making it official. Don't uncover your father's skirt. What does it mean? Let's look. There's another one of these interesting Hebrew idioms here, where it says that a son shall not uncover his father's skirt. What does that mean? Remember we talked about idioms last week? That cost an arm and a leg. Or those two are sleeping with each other. Things that don't mean what the words actually say. What does uncover his father's skirt? What's he upskirting his father? Woohoo! Like the Scottish people do. Make a wish. What's that about? You know? We see variations on this theme in a number of places in the scripture. Phrases such as uncovering his father's nakedness, back in the Noah's time. Seeing someone's nakedness. They do not mean something like a boy running into the girl's shower room at an opportune moment and getting an eyeful. That's not what it means. It is an idiom, a metaphor, illustration that means having sex. Literally means having sex. Uncovering your father's skirt, uncovering the nakedness, you know, all those things. Seeing something, it means having sex. Yeah? Also, in idiomatic Hebrew symbolism, a man's wife is his garment. This was fascinating. A man's wife is his garment. Did you catch that? In thinking and in speech, In this era, a man's wife was thought of and referred to as his clothing, or covering, or skirt, a standard men's garment back then. This is by no means a demeaning reference. Rather, it is the concept that a man's wife is so important and valuable and close to him that it's as if he wears her like a garment. She is a kind of covering for him. Therefore, for this son to remove his father's garment is to steal what is closest and most meaningful to his father's wives and concubines, and clothe himself with them, in them. He is taking that which is meant exclusively for the father within the unity of marriage, the sexual relationship with his wives and concubines, which was legal, still technically scripturally legal today, not ultimate in Yahushua's plan, grand scheme of things, so I definitely wouldn't recommend it. Plus it's illegal in most countries. But, this was a legal relationship within the marriage covenant, So, he took what was his father's within the unity of marriage and is illegally partaking in it. It is a forbidden mixture, an illicit union that the son is seeking to form. And just as to uncovered nakedness, remove a garment, means to have sex, to cover over with a garment means to betroth and then marry. We see this particular scenario with the Messiah's ancestor Ruth, who says to Boaz, "Cover over me with your skirt." Garment or robe means betrothal, to be married. This is a great illustration of why we have so many scriptural translation problems that result in understanding problems. Because people don't have the Ruach inspiration, they don't have divine inspiration, they're just looking at the actual words. How on earth would you know what uncovering, we didn't live back then. You'd have to look at all the documents and references of the people from that time. And that's all been done for us as well, you just got to find it. One of the things this instruction also does is that it turns on its head an everyday, universally recognised cultural understanding at the time. Yahushua says that while everyone else in the world passed their wives and concubines along as part of the inheritance package, in Israel it's not to be done. Not to be done. You've got to be different, set apart. So their behaviour was to be different, wasn't it? He's basically telling his nation, I don't want you to behave like they do out there. I mean, imagine how it would have been from the wives' point of view. I know this was a male-dominated society. It'd be bad enough competing with all the other wives and concubines. Imagine then your husband dies and you've got to be sold off to someone else. It's almost slavery, isn't it? Worse than slavery, because you actually got to sleep with them. Have sex with them. Going forward, let's take up another idea that will be helpful to grasp. We often see the scriptural term taking as it regards a man with a woman. We read that Reuben took Bilhah, or here in Deuteronomy 23 that a son is not to take his father's former wife. Take actually has a dual meaning in scripture speak. It means both to have sex, which is marriage through consummation. Why is sexual intercourse so important in the present era of mankind? Because it is the beginning of creating a family. It is the first step in having children. And critical to the blood covenant of Abraham is fruitfulness and fertility. Remember, your ancestors will be, your descendants will be as many as the stars of the sky, sand on the seashore. How are you going to do that if you never have any kids? So fruitfulness, fertility was very important. Yahushua expects every Israelite to be an active participant in Abraham's blood covenant by multiplying themselves via Yahushua's plan of procreation. Thus, marriage is not only a matter of a desirable and permitted union between a man and a woman, it is the starting line for every Hebrew's duty before Yahushua to participate in the blood covenant by being fruitful. Remember, this was all about the ancestors. I'm honouring the blood covenant that I made with Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. And part of making that blood covenant work is you've got to have kids. So if you're going to graft into Yisrael, get cracking. Start producing. Because that's how you bring strength in numbers. Which brings us to the next part. He's just told the boys, you're not allowed to take your father's wife, a woman or uncover your father's skirt. We know what that means now. Can't sleep with his concubines or da-di-da-di-da. Now he goes on to say, having read this bit about procreation, he says, if a man's testicles have been crushed or his penis has been cut off, which is often done to show devotion to a deity, he cannot enter the assembly of Yahuwah's people. No one born outside of a legal marriage, like an illegitimate bastard, or any of their descendants for 10 generations can enter the assembly of Yahuwah's people either. Interesting. So why is that relevant? Let's go on. With the understanding above about procreation and participating in the blood covenant of Abraham, what on the surface seemed to have little to do with sex and marriage, no male whose genitals are destroyed, altered or removed may join the assembly of Israel. Why that may not seem like anything to do with sex or marriage, we see that a eunuch or a sterile man is being barred from joining Israel because he's incapable of raising offspring and thereby fulfilling Yahushua's blood covenant with Abraham. Do you see how this all starts folding together? A eunuch is generally somebody who, for some sort of reason, religious or, has mutilated himself in some way. Maybe he's cut his willy all the way off, or maybe it's been mutilated in some way. Either way, he's not able to have children, so you're not welcome, because everybody who's grafting into Israel has to be an active participant in the blood covenant. I think we go into that right here. This law of the eunuch, or a foreigner who is sterile, begins a series of regulations that deal with restrictions on who can and cannot join Israel. That subject is pretty interesting because since the time of Abraham, Yahushua made it clear that not only is the result of Yahushua's plan through Abraham meant in some respects for the benefit of the whole world, but that the nations are to be allowed to join Israel as the means of expanding that benefit beyond the Hebrew race. Yet here we are meeting a whole series of exclusions that seem to alter that goal. So a foreign eunuch, or possibly even a sterile male foreigner, cannot become a citizen of Israel. A person became a eunuch for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it was as a result of punishment. Other times pagan religious sects that worshipped a female deity or goddess required emasculation of their priest. Emasculation means cutting off your genitals. There were periods of time when voluntary castration, that also means cutting off a penis, was practiced as part of religious ceremony. And yet at other times, government officials were castrated and made part of special groups called saris. This probably did not include males born with genital defects or were a result of disease or injury. Intention was likely at the center of the exclusion. Foreign men who were emasculated as a result of their paganism were most likely the excluded class that we're talking about here. You've gone and worshipped a deity, you've gone and cut your nuts off because of it, so you are not welcome in here because we are trying to grow a nation here through a blood covenant promised with Abraham. So you are useless to us. The problem with eunuchs is centered in their reproductive organs, or lack thereof. And the requirement for citizenship into Israel for a foreigner has an awful lot to do with their sexual organs, because a male must be circumcised. Interesting. A male must be circumcised in that organ to be considered a full-fledged member of Israel, and generally speaking, must be capable of siring children too. Remember, the seed passes through the, remember we talked about circumcision? The circumcision of the penis, the blood of the covenant, the seed, the semen, the seed passes through the circumcision, passes through the blood covenant into the womb of a woman. So remember, the seed passes through the blood of the circumcision, continuing the blood covenant to the next generation. A eunuch has mutilated his sexual organ such that it is no longer suitable, and in some unfortunate cases not even available for circumcision. We can scoff at the idea of circumcision as a religious symbol, but Yahushua takes it dead seriously. He took it seriously with Moses' son, didn't he? He was going to kill Moses. You're about to go and introduce these people once again to my blood covenant, and you haven't even circumcised your own son. So, and his wife wasn't impressed. "You bloody husband of blood to me, always obsessed with blood." So you can see from our previous episode the importance of blood to Yahushua. So by means of the blood covenant of Abraham, Yahushua gave circumcision a spiritual meaning. It indicated inclusion into his kingdom. To use it for any other purpose is therefore perverse. Jacob's sons Simeon and Levi used circumcision in an incorrect manner to deceive the men of Shechem and weaken them for a bloodbath of slaughter. Remember that? And Jacob more or less laid a curse on Simeon and Levi for this horrendous act. And even though on the surface it was because of their murdering, it was more because of their misuse of the set-apart sign of circumcision. Interesting. I just thought he cursed them and, "Oh, I'm just happy to be dead. I don't want to be around you guys. All your violence and, bloodthirstiness." It was more because of their misuse of the set-apart sign of circumcision. Do you remember that? Before they slaughtered Shechem, they told all the guys, "You can't marry our sister unless you're all circumcised." So all the men went and got circumcised. "And then we'll join your nation. You can join ours. Our wives, your wives, da-di-da." And then they all went and circumcised themselves, and they were all, recovering, and that's when they struck. So through deception, misusing the sign of the blood covenant at this particular time for deception. Circumcision is the key in making especially a foreigner a member of Israel. It must happen with the reproductive organ because human fruitfulness is all about reproduction through the blood covenant promise. Even Paul says that even though circumcision was a physical requirement to be part of Israel, it always was a spiritual issue. And now more than ever, through Yahushua's blood, not even relevant today because we know the circumcision is of the heart. So, circumcise, don't circumcise, it's irrelevant. It's all about the heart condition. So just as Simeon and Levi misused circumcision for the purpose of denying the male residents of Shechem from joining Israel, when any believer takes their spiritual circumcision of the heart and then states that they aren't part of Israel, the earthly kingdom of Yahushua, they are misusing that circumcision, kind of like eating and drinking of Yahushua unworthily. The last couple episodes ago, eating and drinking of Yahushua unworthily, hence making them blood guilty. How do you partake of Yahushua unworthily? By taking everything you possibly can from him, which is free, a free gift, your immersion, your deliverance, the pathway you put on, the open portal on your heart, taking all of this from Yahushua and then slapping him in the face by not wanting to keep going, and digging your heels in wanting your way, your life, your mind, your desires, the world possibly even, Guilty, blood guilty. And also guilty of the what you're doing with the circumcision, spiritual circumcision. Interesting, yeah? So that was good to know about the eunuchs and also about the uncovering the skirt. Then Moses says, "No Ammonites or Moabites or any of their descendants for 10 generations can enter the assembly of Yahuwah's people. Because when you came out of Egypt, they refused to provide you with food and water. And besides, they hired Balaam, remember, to put a curse on you. But Yahuwah your Elohim loves you, so he refused to listen to Balaam and turned Balaam's curse into a blessing for you. So don't even think of signing a peace treaty with Moab or Ammon. But the Edomites are your relatives, and you lived as foreigners in the country of Egypt. So you must be kind to Edomites and Egyptians." Interesting, Egyptians. And let their great-grandchildren become part of Israel and enter the assembly of Yahuwah's people. Interesting. The reason for the Ammonites and Moabites having this special restriction seems to be historic in nature. When Israel needed help, they didn't give them any. Instead, Ammon refused to let Israel pass through, and Moab tried to have Israel cursed through Balaam. Further, they apparently sold Israel the essentials of life that they needed without offering it to them as the guests they were. This was a great offence too. Ammon and Moab insulted Yahusha's people and therefore Yahusha himself. So the wonderful blessing of joining with Israel was held back from Moab and Ammon. Don't ever think this idea or this example of what Yahusha expects of the nations towards Israel eventually left Hebrew thought or Yahusha's thought either. That this expectation of how the nations should treat this set apart nation of Israel never left Israel's mind. Because look, listen to Yahusha's statement here. Matthew 25, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you whom my father has blessed, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you from the founding of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you made me your guest. See how all these sayings and statements and scriptures in the latter books are all from Moses' books. You see, so much of what Yahusha's followers wrote actually recall the ancient historical happenings of Israel's past that remained embedded in Hebrew cultural fabric. Just as this statement of Messiah in the book of Matthew so eloquently says, those who the Father has blessed are welcome to come and take their inheritance as part of Israel. What are the criteria for being blessed? I was hungry, you fed me. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you welcomed me. Ammon and Moab did none of this for Yahusha's people, so they are excluded from joining Yahusha's people and from participating in the inheritance reserved for Yahusha's people, Yisrael. Not allowed in. But Edom and Egypt Edom and Egypt, they were to be kind to. Why? Edom is another name for Esau. Edom means red, which is kind of nickname for Esau. Which is a kind of nickname for Esau, son of Isaac, who we are told had reddish hair and ruddy complexion, generally much like King David would have. Esau's twin brothers was Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel. So indeed, Edom and Israel are brothers, fraternal twins, and Yahusha intends on honouring this relationship. As for Egypt, as unlikely as it would all seem on the surface, Yahusha has reserved a special place in his heart for Egypt because it was where Yisrael sojourned. Apparently, Yahusha is sort of balancing the great honour and respect that Egypt gave Yisrael, the man, when he first arrived, with Joseph as the governor, and for about half of their stay there. Well, it was good for about half the time, versus the hard oppression of Egypt eventually forced upon Yisrael during the last half of their time in Egypt. That led to Yahusha rescuing them via Moses. Now, without a doubt, this decision about Egypt was a practical one because thousands of Egyptians had attached themselves to Israel. So the mixed multitude would have predominantly been from Egypt. So attached themselves to Egypt as they fled Egypt. So impressed were they with the Elohim of Israel. What was to be their status though? After a couple of generations, and perhaps the first 2 generations of Egyptians were part of the wilderness journey, the 3rd generation can be admitted to Israel. Very likely the descendants of those Egyptians that accompanied Israel from Egypt and who produced children and then died were almost instantly made full citizens upon the conquering of the promised land. So, Moses continues, when your men go off to fight your enemies, make sure your camp is acceptable to Yahuwah by staying away from evil behaviour. For example, if a man ejaculates at night, that makes him unclean. So he must go outside the camp and stay there until evening. Then he must take a bath, and as the sun sets, he can go back into camp. This ejaculation is speaking of involuntary, in your sleep ejaculation, not done on purpose. And it's not talking about sleeping with a woman either. So it's talking about involuntary. The body cleansing itself out of any fluids or whatever's needed to. So this is not some kind of strange superstition. Rather, it is to illustrate a profound Yahusha principle. Human sexuality is at the heart of this section of Moses' message and underlies the foundation of the entire scripture. So just as a woman is declared impure by the onset of her monthly cycle, in her in her reproductive system, so is a man declared impure by an unintended emission of semen. In one case, a human egg is rejected and is not viable, and in the other, sperm is spontaneously ejected but without an opportunity to create new life. See the balance? Interestingly, impurity happens to both the male and female in this case because of a misuse of Yahusha's procreative system, even if it's unavoidable. Therefore, this is not called evil or disobedience. However, by definition, this failure of procreation, whereby not all eggs survive and not all sperm meant for fertilization are put to their intended good use, it's the result of mankind's fallen nature and condition. Death of those ovum and sperm should never have been, for they contain life, precious life. Therefore, Yahusha declares that this man, this soldier, who had an emission, must immediately leave the camp and go to a designated place outside the camp. While disobedience and impurity are related, they are not exactly the same thing, and therefore we find the scriptural principle that while water is used for cleansing from impurity, only blood can atone for disobedience. Interesting? So disobedience or sin and impurity are not the same thing. The principle of being sent away because of impurity but being allowed back once purified is what Paul explains using a different metaphor, the olive tree in Romans 11, saying that although much of Israel became impure by not accepting Yahusha, should they change their minds, they can be made pure and taken back. Just as the man with the nocturnal emission is removed from the camp of Israel because he is impure, but can come back once he is cleansed in water, so it is for those branches who are cut off the tree of Israel because they refuse to accept Messiah, and with us deemed impure. They can return once they are cleansed by being immersed in the purity of Yahusha and atoned for by accepting his blood. Interesting, yeah? What happens after you get grafted in? What happens to us after we get grafted into the vine? What happens? That's what we're going to talk about. How does Yahusha train us? Because he's training them much differently back then, wasn't it? It was physical pain, it was physical death, it was physical, come near me, unclean, and you're zapped. How is he training us today? Think about this. Also, Moses continues, also set up a place outside the camp to be used as a toilet area. Make sure you have a shovel, a small shovel in your equipment, so that when you go out to the toilet area, you use the shovel to dig a hole. Then after you've gone to the toilet, bury the waste in the hole. Remember, Yahuwah your Elohim walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and conquer your enemies. So your camp had better be set apart and clean, so that he doesn't see any filthy things among you and leave your camp. Yeah? Don't leave a giant steaming turd next to your front door of your tent. Disgusting. Go out to the toilet area. Why do I have to tell you these things? It's common sense, isn't it? A bunch of savages. When runaway slaves from other countries come to Israel and ask for protection, you must not hand them back to their owners, but instead you must let them choose which one of your towns they want to live in. Don't be cruel to runaway slaves, okay? What a beautiful picture and pattern is set out before us. We as foreigners to Yahusha and his people escape our cruel slave master Satan and run to our deliverer for sanctuary in his kingdom. The rule is that not only must we be accepted, but that the king of this kingdom will never force us to return to our former slave master and to that former condition. Isn't that amazing? Even more, these escaped slaves must live freely among Israel and are not to be told where they can live and where they can't. They must not be ill-treated nor shunned. In Yahusha's eyes, they are just as valuable as those people who are natural-born, free Israelites. What does that say to the religious older brother BS that goes on today in the world? Look how they behave. Are they accepting of those that are coming back into the fold? All of us, you know? How do they treat us? You know? How have we treated them? Make sure that none of your sons or daughters become temple prostitutes. This was interesting. Make sure none of your sons or daughters become temple prostitutes. And don't bring the gift of a whore or the pay of a dog to the house of Yahuwah, your Elohim, no matter what was promised. For both their behaviours and their offerings are an abomination to him. What does that mean? What's the pay of a dog? Whatever a prostitute of either sex earns for their services is never to be offered to Yahusha as a vow payment, or a sacrifice, or a tithe. And such a thing is an abomination to Yahusha, because it is another example of illicit mixture. The money gained from this practice came from an unauthorized union. Therefore, the money, the fruit of that illegal union, is tainted and unacceptable. One of the reasons that the term temple prostitute or cult prostitute is chosen as the English translation in this verse is because the Hebrew word does not mean only prostitute. Remember, I think it was last episode we talked about prostitute. There's two different types, two different Hebrew words explaining prostitutes. One was a temple prostitute and one was just a common prostitute. Common prostitution, though not, ideal, because it's not within the marriage covenant, was a common thing, common prostitution. The thing that really offended Yahusha was temple prostitution. Why? The reason this term temple prostitution or cult prostitution, many translations say cult prostitution. The reason it's chosen as the English translation in this verse is because the Hebrew word does not mean only prostitute, but a set apart holy woman or priestess. That's turning the idea of prostitution on its head, isn't it? From being a lowly status in society to being a set apart higher up than everybody else. Yet in the Hebrew culture, this word took on a very derogative meaning because in Israel's priesthood system, only men could be priests. And because this pagan female holy woman was by definition serving a false deity, nothing could be more indicative of an illicit union in every way. So the same word eventually became an idiom for prostitute, one who engages in illicit unions for pay. See, because all paganism is about rebirth and fertility, female priests would have sex with male priests as a kind of commemorative drama to the reenactment. They would have sex with male priests as a kind of commemorative drama to reenact the reproductive event. Notice all the paintings and sculptures you see from back in this era. It's one deity having sex with another deity, all these orgies, things like that. It's all in the stone carvings and all this licentious, behaviour. So these priests would get in on it to commemorate the rebirth, reproductive system. What is equally as disgusting, maybe more, is that some male priests would dress up as and take the role of females and perform this same ritual with another male priest who took on the male role. Thus we have the reference to the wages of a dog, which was a common Hebrew idiom that meant a homosexual male prostitute. I didn't know that. That's an expression in scripture, wages of a dog, which was a common Hebrew idiom that meant a homosexual male prostitute. So, with this overall understanding, you can certainly see why Yahushua forbade such things for Israel, even to go so far as to say that the money gained from any kind of prostitution under any circumstance was never to be used for a set-apart purpose, like tithing or paying a vow price to the temple of Yahushua. The wages of a dog. Doesn't Yahushua speak about outside there's weeping and gnashing, the dogs and things like that? Or taking the crumbs from under the table like a dog, talking about the outside nations. But what are the outside nations doing? What's their idolatry involved? So you can look up those references if you want. I just think it's interesting. When you lend money, food or anything else to another Israelite, you are not allowed to charge interest. You can charge a foreigner interest, but if you charge your neighbour interest, Yahuwah your Elohim will not let you be successful in the land you are about to take. I'm not going to talk about that. That's common sense, isn't it? Be kind. Don't be ruthless. Don't be a tight ass. if you make a promise to give a gift to Yahuwah, then you do it as soon as you can. If you make a promise to give a gift to Yahuwah, then do it as soon as you can. Because if Yahuwah has to come looking for the gift you promised, you'll be guilty of breaking that promise. On the other hand, if you never make a promise in the first place, you can't be guilty of breaking it, can you? Basically, make sure you keep whatever promises you make to Yahuwah. After all, you are the one who chose to make the promise. It's not compulsory to make promises, so why bother making them? Which is interesting. Why would you make vows and promises? Since it seems like practically every chapter in the scripture deals with people making or breaking vows of some sort of another, let's examine this a little bit so that we can wrap our minds around this very ancient custom of vow making to a deity. It is good in our current era to remember that in times past, the existence of gods and goddesses, and other spirit beings as well, was as universally accepted and believed as the necessity for a human to breathe air and drink water if he wanted to live. That's how common the understanding of the supernatural was. We dealt with this back in our last book. They just assumed that there were deities upon deities upon deities. It was just natural, common understanding. Like breathing air and drinking water. It's only since the period of the Enlightenment in the early 1700s that certain philosophers like Kant, Voltaire and Hume challenged that universal belief and said that only the unenlightened and ignorant accepted such superstitious nonsense, that there is an invisible, all-powerful creator, or that there were angels or spirit beings, because this premise was not scientifically verifiable. Thus we have the birth of atheism and secular humanism barely 300 years ago. Interesting. So prior to 300 years ago, it was just common knowledge that they're supernatural, you know. So alternatively, prior to the 1700s, vow making to the deities was as usual as eating a meal. It was no different for the Israelites than for the rest of the world, except for one thing. It is said of the pagan deities that they want their followers to make those vows and pledges, but Yahushua says he would rather a person didn't make vows and pledges to him. Why did those pagan temples with their pagan priests enthusiastically endorse vow making? Because vow making meant bringing a gift to that pagan deity. So all sorts of bribery and all the stuff that came into the confessional and all that sort of stuff. Why do we want you to make vows? Because making a vow means you're going to give us a gift. So in the end, of course, that gift wound up in the hands of the temple priests. It was no different in Israel, because when a man made a vow, it required a sacrifice and an offering to begin with. To begin it, it required an offering to begin it and complete it. And many of those offerings were given to the priesthood. So he was just like, I don't need any of this stuff. If you can't keep your promise, don't make one in the first place. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. Moses says, if you go into a vineyard that belongs to someone else, you are allowed to eat as many grapes as you want while you're there, but don't take any with you when you leave. In the same way, if you're in a grain field that belongs to someone else, you can pick heads of grain and eat the kernels. But don't be a thief and cut down the stalks of grain and take it with you. You know, a person can pinch off some heads of grain and eat them, or pluck some grapes and eat them to satisfy their immediate hunger. But they can't ask for a doggy bag, or come and fill a basket, or take a sickle and actually harvest and take it away. It's called stealing. Thief, dirty little thief. This wasn't about feeding the poor. This instruction here wasn't about feeding the poor, because for the poor, the laws of gleaning had already been established. Poor people were allowed to glean from around the edges. I think that was an instruction in our last book. And the farmers and landowners were to leave their lesser quality or scraps or whatever around the edges of they were allowed to partake of that if they were poor and hungry. So that's got nothing to do with this. Not about the poor. The poor weren't restricted to only eating what they could consume on the spot either. Rather, this particular law is for travellers. It was perfectly permissible in ancient times to walk through someone's field on a journey. Not everywhere, Not everywhere one needed to travel had a well-defined path or road. Sometimes it was necessary to simply head out in a general direction, and since fields were laid out everywhere, it would have been much too arduous to walk around the edges of the field to reach your destination. Plus there were no rest stops and hostels along the way, and since most common folk travelled on foot, they didn't want to carry large loads. So as they were passing through a field or a vineyard and became hungry, the law permitted them to eat the produce of that field or vine in a limited way. We get an interesting picture of this exact situation in the New Testament, in Matthew 12, when Yahushua and his disciples got into a dispute with some Pharisees over their plucking and eating some grain from a field that they had been walking through, in accordance with this law of travellers in Deuteronomy 23. But the issue was not about stealing or taking advantage of the farmer. Rather, it was about this happened on a Shabbat. And thus Yahushua was accused of defiling the Shabbat. Undoubtedly, this was because he had walked more than the distance permitted on the Shabbat, as defined by the Pharisees, in order to have been in the field outside of town, and he was gathering grain to eat. Therefore, that was also considered work according to some traditions. Yahushua didn't seem to think that the laws he gave to Moses 1300 years earlier should be countermanded by the latest series of man-made doctrines that Judaism had come up with. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, he said. I'm the master of the Shabbat. I'm not doing anything wrong. See how there's the letter of the law and there's the spirit of the law. See? You know, if there's an emergency on the Shabbat, go and tend to it. If Yahushua taps you on the shoulder and says to do something, oh, I can't do that, it's the Shabbat. Well, he wouldn't have told you to do it. He's aware. He's fully aware of his own instructions. You know, if it's a one-off thing or something out of the blue, you go and do it. To be obedient. And then you go back to your Shabbat rest, like you normally would. Or, of course, there's emergencies. If your donkey falls down a well, if your kid cracks their head open or something, you go do what you've got to do, yeah? Use your noggin. All this religious madness that people go along with. That's the text today, guys. And now we're coming back to flogging. You can see that Yahushua is very similar. I mean, look how he treated Reuben. Look how he's treating the eunuchs who aren't allowed to come in, or people who have cut their nuts off, or, you know, very interesting. How's he going to train us today? This is so important. It's one of the most, I've put it on our page with almost like things you need to know up front. Because when you get immersed, you know, you don't know what's about to happen inside your body. You know, not some cosmic spiritual cuckoo event. It's just simply Yahushua is inside you now, and over time, he starts letting you know. Well, how's he going to let you know? He lets you know through his word, through his voice, and through pain. Through pain. Don't believe me? My Yahushua doesn't do that. I don't experience that. I'm a good little boy or a good little girl. I don't do that. Yes, you're not. Why are you so bloody miserable? Because everyone can see it. You're not kidding anyone. Before we do that, let's just look at Hebrews 12 so you can see that this is written in here. This is Paul speaking. He says, "You have forgotten the appeal which speaks to you as sons. My son, do not despise the discipline of Yahuwah, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For who Yahuwah loves, he disciplines and flogs every son whom he receives. My father doesn't do that." Well, are you his son then, his daughter? Because it says straight smack bang here in the scripture that every son whom he receives, he flogs. If you endure discipline, Yahuwah is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom a father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become sharers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. You are illegitimate and not sons. What did the scripture say further up about if you're born illegitimate? A bastard. What did it say about that? You're not welcome in Israel. See, all these things are gelling together. We indeed had fathers of our flesh disciplining us, and we paid them respect. How much Shall we not much rather be subject to the father of ruachs and live? For they indeed disciplined us for a few days as seemed best to them, but he does it for our profit, so that we might share his apartness. And indeed, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but grievous. But afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of obedience to those who have been trained by it. Yeah? It's in the scripture, guys. As soon as you come out of the water, Yahushua moves in and he starts training you, yeah? Through this, chastising and rebuking and disciplining and flogging. What does flog mean? Let's look at the Hebrew word flog. It means to pierce, to flog, a goad, a scourge. Scourge. What does scourge mean? A scorpion. What? A scourge or knotted whip. A scourge, to be stricken with leprosy. Well, that's a disease, isn't it? Did you know that any kind of disease or sickness, uncomfortability, can be flogging as well? A lash, a scourge, a whip. What's a goad? The goad is a traditional farming implement used to spur or guide livestock, usually oxen, which are pulling a plough or a cart. Used also to round up cattle. It is a type of long stick with a pointed end, also known as the cattle prod. Oh, have you felt the cattle prod in your head? A pointed instrument used to stimulate the beast to move faster. Yahushua's saying to us, move faster, get over this, overcome this, stop doing that behavior, stop it. In your head. Have you felt that pain? Stop doing it. Move faster, run your race faster. I'm sick of putting up with this behavior. To prick, reckon. I've been such a prick. Have you been a prick? Yeah, filthy little prick. This is what it means, to prick, to drive with a goad. He'll drive with a goad all the prickness out of you. Get rid of that, you prick. He'll guide it out, drive out with a goad, to incite, to stimulate, to instigate, to urge forward, or to rouse by anything pungent, severe, irritating, or inflaming. Have you had severe, irritating, or inflammation, consequences, or inconvenience, calamities? He was goaded by sarcastic remarks or by abuse, goaded by desire or other passion. Sarcasm as well, if used properly, can goad you, can flog you. You're getting an understanding of why you might be going through. You're not wrong. If you didn't know this, how can you be wrong? But I'm trying to explain to you, Yahushua's bride, if you've been immersed, this is what you're going to go through. I thought I was coming into an amazing experience. I love Yahushua so much and I'm so miserable all the time. Why am I so miserable all the time? Because Yahushua's trying to train you now, because he wants to marry you. You're not perfect when you come out of the water. You've still got all your filthy habits and he hates them. Loves you, hates your habits though. So he can't be joined to you like that. So, in case we don't come back to it, this was a beautiful picture. I loved it. The nails in your head. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. You know, who's that? Are you walking around with this thing around your neck? Yeah? And these in your temples? We're the temple, aren't we? So, and that around your neck, trying to drag you around? Or don't you think Yahushua behaves like this? Well, you better wake up. Let's bring some scripture into this. So we're looking at the flogging and the goading. Let's bring some scripture into it. An instrument of torture. Yet they had a file for the mattocks, and for the coulters, and for the forks, and for the axes, and to sharpen the goads. Sharpen the goads. That's in 1 Samuel. In Judges 3, 600 men were killed by Shamgar, a judge, hero of Israel. After him was Shamgar, son of Anath, which slew of the Philistines 600 men with an ox goad, and he also delivered Israel. So an ox goad killed 600 Philistines. Mental incentive. This is the scripture that was up the top, Ecclesiastes 12. The words of the wise are as goads and as nails fastened by the master of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd. Yeah? So if you overcome and you start behaving a certain way, your behaviour, certainly your words, but your behaviour mainly, can be a goad, can bring a flogging to someone else. Wouldn't you love to have that power? It's not of us though. It's not of how we would think of it. It's not a power hungry thing, selfish thing. No, it's got to come from 𝗂𝗓𝗃, and it can come through your behaviour. So after a while, if you're obedient, trustworthy, you'll stop getting all this pain that you're getting. That's how you know, by the pain that you feel. And then eventually your behaviour will be so good because you're sick of getting the pain. Your example, your witness, will be coming to other people. It'll be flogging them. We can see here in Ecclesiastes 12 that the words of the wise are as goads and nails which are given from one shepherd, 𝗂𝗓𝗃. Even Paul was asked by 𝗂𝗓𝗃, why do you kick at the goads? 𝗂𝗓𝗃 said that to Paul. Why are you kicking at the goads? Why are you kicking at the pricks, mate? Stop being a prick. This teaching is right through the scripture. For being flogged by 𝗂𝗓𝗃 means he loves us. And we read that in Hebrews 12, didn't we? It means he loves us. That means you're getting lots of attention from 𝗂𝗓𝗃, aren't you, if you're getting flogged? The pain of that scourge. The pain of that scourge or goad like a scorpion sting or nail in our head. This pain of that scourge is the chastisement of our behaviour. Face it, guys, this is because of your behaviour. You're getting pain because of your behaviour, not because of what anybody else says. You don't get pain from what they do to you. Somebody could literally smack you across the face and it wouldn't hurt you inside. It's what you do in response where you get pain. And that's why when we do lash out or retaliate and we feel pain, we then blame the other person. But it's not the other person. They're responsible for their part in it. But your pain is not from outside. Your pain is from inside because of what you've said, what you've done, or what you think. Yeah? It could be coming at you from people, stirring you up. Or you could be feeling this in a room by yourself because of all the unclean spirits saying things to you. But it's not until you choose to believe it and think it, do or say it, that you get flogged, yeah? Or chastised, or rebuked, or disciplined, yeah? Varying degrees of pain based on your varying degree of behaviour. So you can't blame anybody else for this. That's the pain you're feeling. It's not the person you think it is. It's not the blame, the excuses, 𝗂𝗓𝗃's word, here we go. 𝗂𝗓𝗃's word is a goad. Did you know that? Why do you think nobody wants to read it or go there? None of my family want to read it or go there. They'd rather sit on their devices, playing little tiddlywinks and fart-assing around on all sorts of stupid games. PlayStation. Even my 4-year-old can just, they're not even looking at their hands, they're just, they can do it back to front, upside down. All they want is the world, The world. They don't want 𝗂𝗓𝗃's word. Why? Because what is it? It brings pain. Oh, we've only heard of 𝗂𝗓𝗃's word being a drunkenness and uplifting. Your love is intoxicating. Yeah, but you've got to come into 𝗂𝗓𝗃's relationship with him to experience any kind of feeling like that. If you don't feel any of the love part of it, even though it's available to you. We don't feel it because we're too dirty, we're too lawless, we're too, emotional. Tossed and turned on every emotion and seat and wind of doctrine, all this sort of stuff. 𝗂𝗓𝗃's word is a goad in your head to all who read it. And until obedience to the wise sayings of our shepherd are behaved in our lives, until these wise sayings are behaved, 𝗂𝗓𝗃 will not stop prodding us. Yahushua will not stop prodding you, will not stop flogging the living hell out of you, will not stop. Why? Because he loves you that much. He prods and pokes and flogs, scourges you to make you put a fire under you. Come on, keep going until we overcome the filth of this world and reach the clean, pure behaviour of Scripture as a living example of His dominion in our life. This is the witness, isn't it? A change. Not a change in dress, not a change in name, not a change in what you've got written on your t-shirt, not a change, it's a change in behaviour. That is the witness that Yahushua is still alive. The creator of the scriptures is still alive and he is available, because look what he's done inside me. That's the witness. Only those who know you long enough will see that witness, and that's the whole idea. It's not to be sprouting out to every Tom, Dick and Harry in the street. It's through personal relationship. People have to have known you and seen this change, you know. His word is a goad. Why do you think no one wants to read it? Because it brings pain. Yahushua will not stop prodding us until we overcome the filth of the world. He will not change. He will not stop. Will not. This pain that you've been feeling and blaming on all the demons and everything. It's not demons. It's you. And it's Yahushua flogging you because of your behaviour. Best face it. It's not going to stop. So, this journey is the most wonderful, painful and privileged experience. Wonderful, painful, true, privileged experience a person could ever embark on. And those refusing the wisdom of Yahushua's living words will suffer inhalation and destruction, which is almost here for the human race. These words are not mine, but have been prophesied. And we all carry the blood guilt. Remember the blood guilt? As we've been talking about. We all carry the blood guilt unless we change our behaviour to the divine laws laid out in Scripture. We all carry the blood guilt. We all have to overcome the world and not behave like the world. Things we thought were okay when we come into Yahushua, we suddenly realise are not okay. Why? Because of the way I feel. Oh, we don't walk on feelings, we walk in belief. Yeah, well, you can feel it if someone loves you or not, can't you? When you look at them. Yeah? When you communicate with them. So, it's best to face this, guys. I want the bride to know this, because no one out there will talk about the flogging, the reality of the flogging. Yeah? I've gone through a hideous experience with my son the last few days. I was starting to get to the point where it could almost be a flogging, because I was hating his guts. Judging the crap out of him. He's 15 years old and he just got a job. He found a job down at the Indian restaurant across the road. He thought of it himself, went and approached them himself and got an interview, and he got the job. And then I went over there, and my wife and I went over there and vouched for him and said, yeah, he's a good kid, you know. He's happy to work here, introduced ourselves, and it was great, you know, vouched for him. And then I find out on the weekend a few days ago that he's quit his job. Didn't even tell me, still even to last night hadn't told me. I was waiting. He told my wife, and I thought, I'm just going to wait and see how long it takes him to actually man up and tell me. Still hadn't, and I was just getting angrier and angrier at him, disgusted with him. Just after 2 shifts, he's quit, you know, and he's 15. I thought, you just want to sit on your bloody video games all day. Disgusting on the weekends. And so anyway, it came to a crux last night after dinner. I must have been in a better mood, or I just had enough of it all, and I just called him out onto the balcony by ourselves, and I had a chat with him. I said to him, do you know what my father would have done when I was a kid if he'd helped me get a job and I rock up after 2 shifts and just quit without even telling him? After smacking me in the face, he would have dragged me down there by the ear and made me apologise and beg for my job back. And my wife said, yeah, my parents would have been the same, you know. these children who are so privileged and comfortable, you know. I said, it's not a good work ethic, is it, mate? And he was starting to get really upset. I said, I was so proud. I said, do you know how many clients I told? I said, that's what parents want for their kids, happy and employed, you know. I said, I want something else for you too, but that's not up to me, you know. But I said, I was so proud of you, mate. You found a job and you were doing it. I was telling all the clients. Then I find out you quit and you didn't even have the guts to tell me or even ask my advice. It was because in an Indian restaurant, he couldn't understand what they were saying half the time. I said, well, I understand that. I work with clients all day. I don't understand half of what they're saying. You know, that doesn't matter. You could stand there and watch, learn what he does, how he's cooking, see what he needs. After a while, most routines in a business are unspoken anyway. You just do and watch. Can you pass me this? Can you pass me that? After a while, you don't need to be told. I said, but after 2 shifts, that's just ridiculous. And you don't have another job lined up. I said, what if you had bills to pay? That's not really a good work ethic, is it? So after a while, we had a interesting conversation and brought the love back in, and we had a few laughs. Turns out he wants to get a job at K𝗪𝗎 down the road at the electrical shop. I said, that would be perfect for you, mate. All the video games and the home entertainment systems and home theatre systems, installations, and you know, even if they put you in the Photoshop for a few months, who cares? It's a better job for you. He reckons his best mate can get him his best mate's dad can get him a doorway in. I said, well, that's what you should do. But I'm talking about your communication, you know, how you treat us, you know, don't even tell me, you know. I said, what kind of smack in the face was that? You know, disgusting. So anyway, the point was, after a while, it's best to break the power. Instead of me judging him and being furious at him and not looking at him or talking to him, after a while, because he's mad, he doesn't have the power, he doesn't have 𝗂𝗍 spirit in him, we should break the power and go and communicate and give the understanding, which I've now done. So, because I don't like the pain, you know, I don't like the pain of the flogging or the chastisement from 𝗂𝗍 when I'm judging. If you're judging someone, look at them doing this and look at them doing that. Oh, I'm so sick of them doing this in my house. I'm so sick of them behaving like this. I'm so sick of them. Like we are some king or queen that should be respected. Well, we should be, all people should be, but that's not how it is it? And we have to be humbled and trodden on, you know. Isn't that what 𝗂𝗍 did? Isn't that where 𝗂𝗍 went? And now his word, when he speaks, cuts right through like those goads. See, branding you like a brand inside you. It burns. So if we have overcome our flesh enough that we are not operating in such emotions all the time, up and down and flaring up and down, happy 1 minute and sad and drama, and if we start leveling out and being, you know, reliable, then 𝗂𝗍 will form a behaviour within us, and he might even give us something to say occasionally. And if we're so used to and trained ourselves to shut up, and people are used to us being quiet, and then we do say something or we do behave a certain way, it burns. Because what burns? The pain of the scourge for our chest. What burns? 𝗂𝗍's word is a goad. Not just the word itself, but those who behave the word. It burns. Do you want to be burned, or do you want to be doing the burning? Yeah? Aren't you sick of being flogged for other people's rubbish? Aren't you sick of judging people? Where does it get you? This is what you've got to come to in your life, in your behaviour. Because you can do this when there's no one else in the room and you still feel like crap. So it can't be anybody else's fault. Oh, it is because I'm still judging them. Well, that's you. That's you. Demons can't make you feel like this. Demons can only operate from without, tempt you and pester you, and then afterwards, if you give in, you know, they run you down and try and keep you down. That's all from without. If you're feeling something within, this is happening with you and 𝗂𝗍. And you can tell if you're happy or not. If you wake up in the morning with a clear conscience, I haven't done anything wrong. Yesterday or the day before or the night before, I haven't done anything wrong. Nothing plaguing my mind. Clear conscience. How beautiful is a clear conscience, guys? But you've got to do it. You have to do it. So that's today. the flogging. It's time that you face that you're being flogged for your behaviour. So, doesn't it say it up here? The words of the wise are like goads and like nails firmly fixed to the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. They're given by one shepherd. So, this was fascinating. I just found this so exciting. Stimulate the beast to move faster. Listen, you beast, you filthy prick. Hurry up and run faster.